get started. So I'm Rakaya Gibson, the owner of the Food Temptress Cookbook store here in Virginia Beach and online at foodtemptress.com. We feature culinary books by Black authors. And today, woohoo, we have an author named Chef Todd Richards, who is the author of Roots, Heart, Soul, the story, celebrations, and recipes of Afro cuisine in America. Here's the book. Oh, okay. Here's the book. Let me do it slower. Got it. All right. I put the link in the chat. And he is the owner of Soul Food and Culture Restaurant in Atlanta. Hey, Chef, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Good. We're all good in Atlanta.
Yes, we are a little bit overcast, but sometimes that's just the way life is. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Well, we're brightening up Atlanta today with our talk. So let's jump right in because we don't want to keep our loyal viewers.
Yep.
So I know you grew up in Chicago. So tell us about a fond food memory that you had growing up.
So, like I tell everyone, first that Chicago is probably the best food city right now in the country. I say, it surpassed New York a few years ago. LA has a really great food scene, but Chicago, I think, has more of diversity in certain aspects of Midwest culture. Well, my favorite food memory, of course, growing up was eating with my family. And my dad worked downtown Chicago. If anyone watched Good Times and they saw that area of Cabrini Green, Montgomery Wards, which I'm really showing my age talking about Montgomery Wards, dad worked there. And so we would drop him off because my dad worked 8 p.m. to 8 in the morning every night. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we would go downtown. We would eat in all types of places, whether it's Greektown, Chinatown, and things like that. But there was this one restaurant in particular, the Queen of the Sea buffet, that we used to go to. And it's this, white tablecloth, beautiful, fine dining-esque restaurant, that did soul food buffet. And you would sit down and the rolls are already buttery and hot and, all types of turkey and chicken and things like that. So I always had this really good mix of food, but just knowing that, dad was always going to work on those days really gave me, emphasis to understand how food from different varieties might be different, but when you eat them often, they become very similar to your palate.
Okay. I love that. So when did you know, like you had this food that you go to in your neighborhood, you watch your dad go to work, but when did you know you wanted to go into the industry?
I honestly, I stumbled into it. I was went to Hyde Park High School, University of Illinois, Chicago, and I was transferring to Georgia Tech to come to Atlanta. Kind of bored with college, so I got a job at Kroger as a butcher. And once I started doing that, I really knew that it fed both of my brains. Food does. Being, my major was more in science and physics, so I had that scientific brain, but the creativity side of being able to cook the applied sciences and things like that, it fed both parts of my brain. Excuse me. But then, what made it interesting though about food, my parents put me in music school as a kid, so I always had this artistic form as well. So it's kind of just put all those things in perspective, but it's a little bit of insanity inside of it because you're trying to recreate that same exact experience every single time, and that's what makes it great to be a chef. But I just knew it when, I started cooking at the Blue Ribbon Grill. Then I went open the Four Seasons Hotel, and when I got into hotels, I knew I was set. That was it. Wasn't doing anything else.
What was it about the hotel scene?
It really just reminded me of family. The way we would travel to downtown Chicago and the big cities, big lights and things like that, watching the hotels, going to the John Hancock 95th floor restaurants and having, holiday brunch there, Easter brunch or something like that, seeing the chef in a stark white, jacket, long, tall chef coat and things like that. But also the discipline I think the discipline of hotels and that type of, very refined dining to me really fit because you had to be precise about every single thing that you do. And it couldn't waver and you couldn't change and things like that. So it really just felt like a natural place for me to be, because like I said, it fed into a lot of different things besides just cooking. I can see things, I can hear things, tap into all the senses, and that's what makes cooking still fun for me today.
Hmm. So it makes me wonder, Chef, when you mention in the book that you like physics, you come
Mm.
from the science background. So do you like to bake?
So baking is a different it's a different genre of cooking,
Mhm.
all on its own. It requires a lot of patience and timing. And what I love about baking though also is that it creates different smells inside of a home or a restaurant that you can't get from anything else. And there's only a couple things that will do that as well, such as barbecue and the smoked meats. You can only get that feeling from that. Bacon, coming out of the oven or out of a fryer. You can only get that smell, and breads and cakes and things like that. You can only get those things from it. So what I enjoyed about that side of it is the precision, but equally is the smells and hues and how it lights up the entire area in which you're in, which gives me joy. Now, if you ask me, could I do that repeatedly and things like that? It wasn't until a few years ago when I did sold my first book, and Erica Council took these knobby hands over here and helped me learn how to make biscuits that I can really say that. But quick breads, love banana breads, love things like that. So it's just part of being a chef, having a round repertoire. But I think that baking side will be something I do more in my later years.
Okay. So what has been the greatest moment of being a chef?
That's very easy for me. Watching all my cooks become successful. That to me is it. I believe you know uh, uh, our government right now is having a issue or crisis about understanding, what it is to be diverse. But growing up in kitchens where people are only relegated to certain stations, or you're only supposed to do certain things, or you can only work in certain areas, that's never been in my kitchens. Anyone would tell you I've had more women chefs come out of my kitchen. I have had more, people who open up their own business come out of my kitchen. I've seen, people, who weren't really great in the kitchen and went to the front of the house, became more successful. Watching anyone who comes out of working with me and becomes successful, that's the greatest joy.
Mm. Thank you for that, Chef. And thank you for all the people you've helped. That is wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about your book,
Yes.
Roots. Um, I know you a co-author with Amy Page Codone. Is it Codone?
Condon, yeah.
Condon.
Yeah.
You're co-author with her.
Mm.
Now, describe that book for me in your elevator speech.
Roots Heart and Soul is really the great story of and celebration of food beyond survival. A lot of times when you talk about the slave narrative of and the contribution to this country, and we always talk about it from a survival sense, but we don't talk about it in the pure agriculture sense that slaves were brought here in order to cultivate the lands in a different way, along with the Native Americans. You don't understand. We don't talk about how a lot of this country's foodways is developed through that. There's no barbecue in the sense of that we have it without this happening. And then the story of travel and migration, and how we take traditional cooking techniques and bring them all the way throughout the country, and we're still using these cooking techniques today. Now it might be different sauces or things like barbecue, for instance, depending on what region you are, whether you have sauce on the meat or off the meat, but the technique is still there. Cultivating rice, the technique is still there. Jerk, is equally a part of barbecue as traditional smoky meats are. And then also, it just tells a story that we're not a monolith. We don't just do things all the same. That we have different shape and hues inside of our own shape and hues. And my sister and I grew up in the same household, and we're 7 years apart. And I cook collard greens with just collard greens. My sister does collard greens and turnips. We're 7 years about, the same household, and we cook collard greens 2 different ways.
Mhm.
And that's what Roots Heart Soul is about. It's just showing that we're not a monolith, that this is not survival food. This is celebration food. And it has permeated the country, not only this country, but I said the Americas for a reason, because you can't talk about, North America without talking about South America or Central America and its influence to those regions as well.
Okay. I love that. And I love in the book that, there's no right or wrong way, to make your collard greens, for example, or your cornbread. Depends on the region where you're from. And we have some variations of those. And so I really wish, and I think you said this in the book, I really wish people would just give people grace when they talk about making certain dishes because, we make them differently in different households, right?
Well, not only, not only that, I mean, collard greens are not readily available in California. You know,
Right.
and the travel time. Though we have modern technology and things like that, once you pull any roots out of the ground, it's deteriorating all the way till it gets there. So no matter the recipe might be the same, but the collards coming straight out of the ground here in Georgia, where most of the collard greens in the southeast are grown, and the same, and those same collards go to LA, where we have chicken and beer in LA, they're not going to taste the same. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, the conditions are different. The time is different. The time out of the ground is different. Even though they got there overnight or 2 days, so it doesn't matter. The water washing is different. So how similar, do we get there, and are the techniques the same?
Hmm. And let me tell you, Chef, I'm going to hold it up again. I really wish I had this book. Uh, I really wish I had this book growing up because it really is a historical record that feeds the soul, but it's presented in a way that I could digest it. Hey,
Right.
forgive me for all the puns, but it
Yeah.
is like when I read it, I got the history and I understood it as it relates to food. Whereas sometimes history is presented in very dry fashion without us. And so I appreciate that and I thank you for that. So, why was it important for you to write this book?
Well, the thing is that if you wanted to know the people, follow the people, follow the food, and so just to get backstory. So when I wrote Soul was more biographical. And I use the Star Wars analogy where Star Wars came out first, and then Empire Strikes Back and all that. But then they went to the prequels before that, and I said, well, Soul was successful, but I don't think I gave people the prequel to how I got here, how I understood it, and what are the journey of the people along the way that got my family to Chicago at some point in time. And I wanted to tell that story. And then secondly, I wanted to understand people to understand that there's a black and brown food culture that what is the we're far more similar than we are different, especially when you understand the relationships of Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Haiti, and how that triangle and going through Cuba shaped the whole southeast, and then the migration periods up between Chicago and New York and those areas like that. How do we tell these stories in the most delicious way? And when you're doing so and telling those stories in a delicious way, then you break down, the precursors of isms, like I say, that you can't be, if you can't be, there's no racism, there's no classism, there's no of these isms when you all sit down and you understand that your ingredients are all basically the same, and that the cooking techniques are the same, and that any class or ism that you put on somebody else is out of your own bad preconceived notion about that person.
Mm, yes. And I think the book does an excellent job of stressing that. What are some of your favorite dishes in the book or the must try? Like, I need to try that
Well,
recipe.
but like I tell people, recipes are like children. You're not supposed to have
I
favorites.
know, I know. And I know better, chef, but I decided to put you on the spot
Yeah.
anyway.
The thing is that I'll say this. So most people don't know that we wrote this book during COVID. So we had a very challenging time writing the book, and a lot of the research that we were doing, we could not do in person until the absolute last minute. And so, in doing so, there was multiple parts of the books that we were cooking at the same time because we had to approach it that way because those only areas and places that we can go to actually do so. So when I look at Puerto Rico and like, you know, the Puerto Rican steak dish, that to me was so surprising how refined the technique was, how delicious it is, and how that one dish can go on any white tablecloth restaurant, anywhere in the world. And it gave me a different perspective of Puerto Rico in the sense that it's not just tacos, where everyone just distill things down to that, or they distill that, Mexico, Puerto Rico, it's just tacos, and, tacos, just like bread, is a vehicle, for things. It's not the thing that of itself. I will also say going out west, through that trail of going through, leaving Caribbean and going through Veracruz, Mexico, and going over that way and understanding like mole and all these other sauces with the African influences and the squashes and things like that. Also broaden the horizon of understanding what the Afro-Latino portion of the Americas cuisines is, and how it's so important to understand the seeds and legumes and the squashes and things that came through that area, and why there's always this flavor of chili, but the chilies could be divided by what region you're in, whether it's chili in those form of green peppers or the chilies in the form of red peppers, where it's smoked, why smoke paprika in some places and paprika is not in any places at all. So the best recipes to me are the ones that pique your curiosity about one town over. What are they doing the next town? Why is buffalo so good in Chile? And then why is rabbit so good here? What is growing in that terroir, in that region, that these animals are eating that makes this food so good?
Okay. So
long answer, but that's the best way I can say it.
Okay. So in other words, you need to get the book.
Yes.
And you
yes.
need to try some of
Yes.
the recipes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one that I think the recipes I thought was fun to write was the banana pudding recipe, the tale of two worlds of meringue versus no meringue.
Mhm.
And I'm still divided. I am still divided about between meringue and no meringue. Yeah. So that one to me is fun to have both. Because it really depends on who makes the quality of meringue. Which if the meringue could be caramelized beautifully and it's
Yeah.
crispy and you can break into it and the texture is right.
Mhm.
But sometimes people don't give it enough time and meringue is too soft, so you might get it caramelized and then it gets a little bit chewy, and that to me is so. I'd much rather just eat the regular banana pudding, but still, I don't know. That to me is still the one that I wrestle with the most.
Yes, and I must say, you actually make your own banana pudding. It's
Oh
not
yeah,
from a
yeah,
box.
yeah.
You make it the real
But
way.
but you know what though? I if a person cannot make pudding and the box is the only vehicle that they can use to get it, I'm not going to knock them for it.
Right.
What I will knock them for is not selecting really good bananas.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
And just and to me, I agree. I don't knock people for it, but I also want them to know the history of banana pudding.
yeah.
That what they're making from the box is not, the southern way that grandma used to make it, and sometimes people don't
Yeah.
know that part of it. So I really appreciate that. But
Well,
ultimately,
I think people don't understand that Kool-Aid came out of sorrel either. That's why I had Jackie Summers in the book too, telling that story of sorrel. And I think that Kool-Aid is red number 6 and something else, and it's not. It's actually from sorrel. So.
hmm so I really love that.
Mm.
I personally like warm banana pudding, so that's usually my debate. I like it warm.
I definitely would agree with you on that. Especially again talking about the bananas. If the bananas are not at the ripeness and you serve them cold, that starchiness comes, to prevail in there. And so I can agree with you on that take as well.
Okay, good. See, yay! All right, Chef. So it's a 3-part question.
Okay.
What did you learn about yourself, the community, and people by writing this book?
Well, the people, I think I'm going to start with that one first. What I learned about people is that there needs to be more advocates for their stories, because a lot of the divided railroads that we can't cross over is because there's a natural unease that it seems that's prevalent right now, that people don't want to know anything else about their neighbors next door. And the people that I would encounter and talk to, they not only took me to their place, they took me to the person next door. They were quick to say, I don't make this, this person makes this. Go see this person. And, if you really want to know the story about it, come talk to this person's mother or go talk to this person's father and understand it. So when you really are genuine in telling someone else's story through the lens of food and culture, they're more apt to give you everything about their history because they want their legacy to live on in the most delicious way. What I learned about myself is that as a chef who's worked in some of the best restaurants in the world, who ran some of the best restaurants in the world, that my knowledge of food is still very limited. That I still, people ask me, do I use my own books to cook out of? And I do. I mean, I still use them for reference every day. Yeah, to do so. What was the second? I always forget the middle one. What's
And
the
then
middle?
the community, just the community as a whole.
Yeah. Well, community as a whole is, is that people are, I think people are getting a little bit tired of the sea of sameness. That just eating flour tortillas is just not enough. We're the blue corn, heirloom corn tortillas. People are more curious about yams instead of what we've been taught as yams as sweet potatoes. They want to know more about those. Why do we have these Peruvian sweet potatoes in the stores right now that taste so much nuttier and things like that? I think COVID allowed people to cook more at home. They forced people to cook more at home, and diners became more sophisticated in understanding of food. And the community as well, they don't want to put up with a lot of BS in food. They want it to be honest. If this is what you say you're presenting, this is what they want it to be on the plate. Mm-hmm. And they have 160 characters to tell the world either how great you are or how bad you are, and very rarely is there a message in between.
True. Very true. And I find that in your book, your recipes are approachable. They're familiar in some ways.
I never want to write a recipe in a cookbook that you have to search the world for to find the ingredient. That's not the purpose. Now, not to say that those books don't exist and they're really great. I mean, I have tons of them, but in order to get people to cook, I needed to make it as simple as possible. I needed people to walk into their pantry at home and say, "Hey, I got this. What can I do with this?" And here's the book.
And I think for me, because of the history in the book, I want to learn to make some of these recipes, and I want to learn to modify them and make them my own, because you laid the history out so beautifully, and I thank you for that.
Well, the history is, it's I'm just fortunate to tell other people's stories. I tell people, if you don't have serrano peppers, can you use jalapenos interchangeably? Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but only what are you going to do is to cook it and find out.
Mm-hmm, that's right. So, Chef, we're winding down a little bit. What's
Okay.
next for you? Like you have your book,
Oh man.
and I kind of heard a little story about it, but tell our audience.
Yeah, so we overwrote the book. We had all this time, to write it. So we have a whole chapter of California that didn't even put into the book. So hopefully, Emmy and I get together and start working on book number 3. Naturally, yeah, I'm with Jaguar Hospitality, so I have 6 restaurant openings this year, plus 2 turnovers, plus one of my own that I'm doing. So life is full of restaurants, twists and turns, and just continually to eat delicious food, drink great champagne, and meet people like you that celebrate food and culture around the world.
Oh, well, thank you. So, how can people stay connected so they can learn about the next book, learn about your restaurants?
Well, I can tell you this: if you have my phone number, don't ever call me because I'll never answer my phone. You know,
Okay.
So the best way is always to text me, or of course you can find me on social media at Chef Todd Richards on all platforms. Also, I have a podcast as well based on the book called Roots Heart Soul Podcast, available on all platforms as where of course podcasts are viewed and heard. We have a YouTube channel of Roots Heart Soul, and then of course I'm always traveling across the country. So if you see me around in the airport, just stop by, say hi, and let's talk food.
Great. Now, Chef, I'm gonna have you slow it down a little bit and tell
Okay.
us the podcast name again.
Oh, podcast is Roots Heart Soul. It's
Roots Heart
it's based
Soul.
on it. Yeah.
All right, right.
Yeah.
Just like the book. All right,
Yeah.
so I'm
Like
gonna
the
show
book.
it again. Roots
Right.
Heart Soul. You can get it in the Food Temptress Cookbook store in
Yes.
Virginia Beach inside the Painted Tree Boutiques or online at foodtemptress.com. Thank you, Chef, for taking the time to chat with us. And hopefully we'll visit your restaurant soon down in Atlanta or somewhere around the country.
Yeah. If not, I'll come up there and see you guys in Virginia Beach. Love to have a signing at the store.
So you're more than welcome. So thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Cherie.